Hi there. The third day of my second series of lockdown lectures, given in collaboration with Discipling Nations, partnership that I have as I'm on their board and work with them on many of their projects. What I'm doing, if you're tuning into this once off, is I'm giving a report back on research that I did a couple of years back into evangelism in the Methodist Church, and trying to put in accessible seminar form that which those discoveries that I've made. I think this material is extremely interesting. And I hope you come to share my enthusiasm for it. We've been doing a watchword every session, Moravian style, and our watchword for today is be transformed, from Romans chapter 12. Be transformed, completely changed. Why be a little Christian when you could be completely and utterly overboardly Christian? I wonder if you've had an experience like I have. When I was 17, I had this experience of God getting hold of me and turning my life inside out. It was as if my life had just blown apart. And when the shock wave of the explosion had disappeared, I came back to this flattened crater of my life, and there was Jesus sitting on a chunk of masonry on the edge of the crater, and a process of rebuilding my life, completely restructuring it, began. It was my coming to faith in that experience, the set of experiences really, has lasted for the next 54 years of my life. I'm still making my choices.
70.
Leslie says 44. 44 years of my life. I'm still making choices based on that experience of Jesus coming to be the center of my life and being in charge of the rebuilding project. Now, it's not something I deserved. I don't feel as though I'm better than anyone because I've had such an experience. And I do believe, though, that anyone can have such an experience, that it's possible, maybe in a less dramatic form or a more dramatic form, for anybody to have that sense, that complete change in worldview. That's why we're looking at this idea, be transformed, today. Now, so far in the course, we've looked at the material that I derived from my interviews with several Methodist ministers looking at evangelism in the Methodist Church. I recorded the interviews, transcribed them laboriously, and then read and reread them and found that there were certain threads that went together. And if you'd like to get the full record of that, I have published a book on Kindle called Riding the Small Horse, which you would be able to get hold of, especially in lockdown conditions. And the first of this series of report backs, we looked at the unavoidable and uncomfortable truth that the Methodist Church is sinking, shrinking, and going down to trending towards zero. We're not in a good state, and that comes from both personal observations and my conversations with the ministers. And then yesterday I looked at the importance of John Wesley's journal as an example of how someone 250 years ago or so set out to reverse such a trend that was present in the church of his time. How John Wesley set out with a daily impetus to agitate for a change in that. Also noted that John Wesley's journal, where he recorded his day-to-day experiences, is not really part of the consciousness of the ministers of the Methodist Church at the moment. It's not it's not an important strand in their consideration of how to be the church in our times of stress and crisis. And out of both the interviews with the ministers and a close reading of John Wesley's journal, and these are my notebooks on. I took notes on Wesley's journals. I drew little pictures as well. It's not all writing. There's John Wesley trying to draw a crowd. He seems to have got some children. There's the angel that disappeared, the wooden angel that disappeared, all sorts of stories, proto-Red Cross being founded, the role of conscience, the role of preaching. There's John Wesley being rowed across a flood in a miniature boat, and someone getting something thrown into their mouth, and I don't know, I find them fascinating. Both because I have a love for old diaries, but also because the day-to-day picture that he draws of someone who was concerned with the state of the church and was trying to do something about it, I find very inspiring. Anyway, a theory emerges that reading Wesley, would it be possible to re-salvage this idea of conversion? Would it be possible to reimagine an idea of evangelism that I think has been sadly eroded, and what we know as evangelism is not entirely helpful? And wouldn't it be possible to have an expanded idea of the place of worship? Right, and today we're going to look at re-salvaging conversion. I've got a nice picture of a boat being salvaged here. Background, you might enjoy it. Let's just look at that. I think that's a cool picture of a boat being pulled up. Can you see the cables? Yeah. Let's attach some cables to our church and see if we can get it afloat again. The way the ministers see conversion is quite interesting. There's quite what emerged from the interviews with these men and women was that conversion is a miraculous but very rare, self-aware inner change, which God works in some people. It has, in some cases, a conscious point of conversion, and happens in other people through a series of conversion experiences, or even in some cases without any self-identifiable conversion experiences. But it results, you can see that it's happened and is happening. It results in a lifelong process of drawing nearer to God and living an increasingly authentic Christian lifestyle. I think that would be a fair summary of what the ministers that I spoke to would see, would understand conversion as being. There are some implications, though, because the ministers generally only expect or require or ask people to look for this conversion by installments. They operate with a what we might call a conversion by sanctification model. Teach, 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 and people will gradually get better, better, better. And the ministers expect the general teaching, their word and sacrament, their pastoral care, to cause this gradient of conversion, one could call it. The ministers do only address Methodists. They certainly don't address people from other denominational backgrounds, and they aren't speaking to people who are not Christians. Ministers speak to Methodists. Methodist ministers speak to Methodists. On the flip side of that, a strong theme that comes through the interviews is that the ministers are deeply dissatisfied with how little evidence there is of the sanctification. They want it, they expect it, but they don't see it. And when asked to tell me example stories of people that are converted in whatever means, whether by this process or by a cataclysmic spiritual event, there are very few stories. I pushed ministers to tell me stories, and they couldn't dredge up stories to tell me. It was very interesting. Now, reading John Wesley, and particularly reading the journals, it becomes clear that for John Wesley, conversion was both a cataclysmic reorientation, the sort of blowing up and reconstruction story, both that and a lifetime of small conversions, of small movements from guided by the Spirit. Hi there, Valerie Harty. Nice to see you again. For John Wesley, conversion was an awakening to the reality of the importance of God. Awakening is a key word in understanding Wesley's approach to things. Someone who became a Methodist was someone who had become deeply aware of a change in affiliation towards God. This was suddenly the big thing in their lives, and so sanctification, this growth in this improvement in spiritual terms, I don't know what to call it. Sanctification arises out of this conscious justification that God has put me right through Jesus. And people both inside and outside the church need an opportunity to hear the gospel, respond to it, and believe in it. This is a message for both insiders and outsiders. It's not just for those who come in the door. That's John Wesley. So now I did a lot of reading on this subject, and I think the best book is a book by the best technical investigation of the idea of conversion is one by an author with the unfortunate name of Louis Rambo, Understanding Religious Conversion. Here it is. I've got a second-hand copy of a book. Doesn't look very exciting, so I in order to make people more excited about Louis Rambo, I tend to use this picture. It's not really fair either on the actor or the theologian, who's probably heartily sick of people making those jokes. But the book is very interesting, and I'd really encourage you to read it. He has a vast database of conversion, religious conversion. So, and by that he means conversion to Christianity, conversion from Christianity, conversion to and from Judaism, to and from Buddhism, to and from atheism, to and from Islam. A sense of it. He's looking at the dynamics of what happens when someone has a change. in an inner worldview that is bound up with religion. And what emerges from the book is that there are things that are observable. They're observable dynamics. Something really happens to people. The change is a real change. And that conversion is a cultural, sociological, and psychological phenomenon, as well as a religious one. And perhaps the most important thing that one gets from reading Rambo is that conversion is a thing. It's a thing. It's a normal human phenomenon for the 21st century. And I can heartily recommend this book. He says there's lots of ways in which conversion change happens in people, and a useful list of some of the things he identifies that you might find helpful. I certainly do. A conversion from no faith to faith commitment. Perhaps a change in religious faith system, e.g. from Islam to Christianity. A change of subsystem orientation, e.g. from Methodist to Assemblies of God. A move from haphazard superstition to faith in a deity. Perhaps a move from ritual to a spontaneous experience of God. That's very Wesleyan. All of these things are actually Wesleyan. This could be a checklist on the journals. Viewing the world as only evil to viewing the world as full of good potential. Moving from seeing oneself as worthless to seeing oneself as having personal dignity. Moving from perhaps being purely pleasure-seeking to having responsibility in the world. And maybe moving from selfishness to justice. Interesting series of possibilities, of ways in which one might experience change in one's life through an experience of conversion. And if I were running a seminar, I'd get people to break into groups at this stage and ask in what ways incremental change is important for pastoral understanding. And I'd ask them to discuss how does Wesley's idea of awakening relate to change that happens in people. And I'd ask you to discuss, is drowsiness a thing these days? And if so, how does it show itself? And those discussions would be an integral part of the seminar. It wouldn't just be me as a talking head. Sadly, that's all you've got at the moment. Another insight from Rambo is that conversion isn't a series of logical steps. It's a matrix of different things that happens. A set of points, perhaps, that show a complex reality. Sometimes conversion comes through crisis. There's a quest to find meaning or to re-establish solidity in life. An encounter. You can't become a Christian without some sort of encounter with the gospel through some agency. And then interaction, a thinking through, a rejection and acceptance, commitment, and living through the consequences. And sometimes things happen in a haphazard order and at different levels in the same issue is worked through at different levels at different times in people's lives. But this series, no, it's not a series, it's a matrix. It's a complicated whole And I say that because you can't reduce conversion, in my view, to four spiritual laws. That's perhaps a useful conversational tool with someone who has got to the point of commitment, but that person will have God will have been working with that person through issues of crisis and quest and encounter and interaction already before they come to the four spiritual laws. And they still need to work through things such as the consequences of their decision, which can be extreme. So there's a lot to be said, and I say a lot about it in my book, a lot. But at this point in a seminar, I would again ask people to break away and ask them how this idea of Rambo's points in the conversion matrix help you to understand your own walk with God. Crisis, quest, encounter, interaction, commitment, or consequences. And I'd also ask which elements of conversion, according to Rambo's matrix, are generally absent or less visible in your church context. That would be so fascinating. That would generate stuff that I certainly don't know. I'd be very interested to hear the answers to, or the interactions around those points. But that's the first step in the paradigm for evangelism that emerged from my research. That it's possible and very interesting and challenging to rethink this whole thing of conversion and maybe reconsider the way in which we go about talking about change and transformation. Let's pray together. Lord of the harvest, please awaken all of us to both the ordinariness and the power of complete inner transformation. Amen. Well, if this is true, then how are you going to pass it on? My daily question. How? If this, what I've said is true, if conversion is a relevant issue for the 21st century, what are you going to do about it? Well, I can recommend reading Rambo. You can read Wesley's 44 sermons. 12 of the 44, that's about a quarter of Wesley's sermons, are about this sort of radical aspects. I can send you these slides. You can collaborate with me by running seminars. You can just, well, you can't run seminars at the moment, can you? But after lockdown has gone over, after COVID-19 has passed us by, you could perhaps ask Discipling Nations to run the seminar at your church. See what it turns up and see if it helps to align your church better with the purposes of the mission of God. That's it for today, guys. In the meantime, I can only recommend that you stay soapy.